and gentlemen. The year was 2007, and I, the mighty General, had just acquired the Xbox 360, the most mighty of all gaming consoles of the time. And ultimately, the very first game I picked up was Quake 4. Why Quake 4, you may ask? Well, Quake 4 came out in 2005, and in 2005 I had a computer that could not run it. And so until 2007 I just sort of drooled over this particular game. When I finally played it, I was disappointed. Why? Because I felt it was too modern. Oh yes, I thought Quake 4 was too modern. Ah, the ignorance of youth. Today, we're going to tear down some of my old opinions on Quake 4 and see just why this game is actually a classic. So with that, let's pop it in and take a look. Quake 4 is not actually a sequel to Quake 3, as Quake 3 was a multiplayer-only game that had no story in the game proper. Rather, Quake 4 is a direct sequel to Quake 2, which itself was not a sequel to Quake 1, as Quake 2 was so named because id Software couldn't come up with a better name. One must also keep in mind that Quake 4 was not developed by id Software, rather it was developed by Raven Software, a software company well known for taking id Software engines and making great games out of them. Graphically, Quake 4 has aged gracefully, and the graphics still look at least halfway decent by 2017 standards. The game does indeed have the same issue that Doom 3 had, where many of the faces are identical, although Raven Software mitigates this somewhat by keeping most of the Marines in helmets. As far as the levels go, they are the first point of contention. They are nowhere near as good as Quake 1 or 2's levels, and really just amount to corridors. However, since this game predates the rise of the COD monster, the levels are not that bad in terms of linearity, but they are still far less interesting than the previous Quake games. Despite its level design, Quake 4 is still a true first-person shooter. And thankfully, you get to carry all your weapons on you at any one time. There's no two-weapon rule here. The game has 10 bloody weapons for you to use, as is right and proper for a Quake game. But sadly, no BFG 11K. The first weapon of the game is the blaster, and eagle-eyed viewers will see that the blaster in Doom 2016 takes inspiration from this weapon. The blaster itself returns from Quake 2, and it's good for just about nothing, and is almost immediately replaced by the machine gun. And this will be one of your go-to weapons, as it has high ammo capacity and does decent damage. But that being said, its damage really is quite low, and even the weakest of enemies will take multiple hits to take down, leaving you open to taking damage. This weapon, along with the blaster, is equipped with a flashlight for seeing in dark areas, although unlike in Doom 3, the super dark areas are few and far between. Next, you have the shotgun. It does great close-range damage and can put down many weak enemies in one shot, and it's a better go-to gun than the machine gun, but you need to ration the ammo. Then you have the nail gun for all your roofing needs. It makes a return from Quake 1 and is a good weapon for taking down middle-range enemies. Next, you have the grenade launcher. This weapon is quite good for shooting around corners, and as this game is really tough at times, you will be so low on health in certain instances where you need to avoid incoming fire at all costs, meaning you will want the flexibility of shooting without exposing yourself to return fire. Then you have the rocket launcher. It does good direct damage against heavies and can give some of the more annoying enemies in one shot, and is very much a go-to heavy weapon. Returning from Quake 2 is the Hyper Blaster. This was an absolutely indispensable weapon in Quake 2, as it was capable of shredding both hard enemies and easy enemies alike. In this game, it's kinda like that, although it doesn't shred hard enemies, rather it's only good for shredding moderate enemies and easy to kill enemies alike. Ultimately, it's still a good go-to gun if you're out of rockets or other heavy weapons, as it can take down heavy enemies if you shoot them long enough, although like with the shotgun, you're going to want to ration the ammo as much as possible. Next, returning from Quake 2, is the railgun. This provides a good long-ranged option and is good for killing some of those really annoyingly powerful enemies in one shot. Another awesome return from Quake 1 is the lightning gun. The lightning gun is badass in many regards and is good for taking on heavy enemies and large groups of weak enemies. Last, but certainly not least, is the dark matter gun.
It's the BFG of the game and looks really quite cool and eats bosses for breakfast and lunch and dinner. Most of the time at least. Sadly, half the time the dark matter ball just goes through the enemies, meaning you have to shoot at their feet so that they will actually get damaged by it. All the weapons in the game will get upgraded as you go through the story. You don't earn points or anything like that. Instead, your fellow Marines will just give you an upgrade randomly. And these upgrades can be and are a gift from the great Omnissiah. They range from new fighting abilities to upgraded ammo count to other things of that nature. As your foes get tougher and tougher, you will need every advantage you can get. Next, we have your fellow Marines. On sane difficulties, they each act like mini Doom guys, and can hold their own in a fight and are actually quite useful. You have three types of friendly Marine. You have the basic Marines that shoot enemies and are not afraid of anything. Then you have Navy Corpsmen who shoot the enemy and are not afraid of anything and heal you. And trust me, you are going to be needing them quite a bit. And lastly, you have the Tech Marine. He shoots the enemy and is not afraid of anything as well, but he also fixes your armor. And believe me, you're gonna want this guy around because the enemies shoot through your armor like it was bloody cheesecloth. The game also introduces turret segments, but they never go on that long, and they make sense in context, and they don't go on long enough to get really dull. And there's actually some weight to them as well. The game even features vehicle sections. You can control a tank and later a mech. These segments are quite fun and break up the general shooting and give the game some variety. And oh, by the great space dragon, did I hate them back in the day. I felt they broke up the first-person shooting and made the game dull, which is weird because I like the driving in Halo, but then again the driving in Quake 4 is a bit more linear. Still though, the driving segments are quite enjoyable if you come at them with an open mind, and once again, just be glad they are not scripted segments.
Thankfully, Raven Software chose not to innovate where it counts, as there is no regenerative health anywhere to be found.
Like in Quake 2, you fight space cyborgs. And like in Quake 2, Quake 4 has a good level of enemy variety. You're not going to be filling the same hapless enemies full of lead and plasma nails over and over again. You start the game off fighting some generics, but then you move on to this orc-looking bastard that takes a good amount of damage to put down, and the enemies just get cooler from there. By far the most annoying bastard in the game is the Strogified Marine. He is armed with the same weapons you are, and they do just about as much damage as you can do with said weapons, meaning they can and will kill you very, very easily and quickly. The game also features several boss battles, and by the great Omnissiah 10101, they are really quite excellent. And some can even be emotional, but I shall not be spoiling that one. One minor nitpick I have about the enemies is the fact that unlike in Quake 2, the bodies don't stay on the screen. When you kill something, it disappears almost immediately. This was done in Doom 3 as well, and I can only assume this was done to save on CPU cycles. It's not that bad, but still, I liked orienting myself via all the bloody carnage that I was able to create. One thing you gotta love about Raven Software, though, is they at least gave us a story reason for the bodies disappearing off the screen. They are teleported by the Strog Central Command to be turned into Stroyant, which is then used to make more Strog. So at least it makes logical sense for them to be teleported away. The radio makes a return from Doom 3, and it actually is done a little bit better here. In Doom 3, the radio would pop up and you would hear your compatriots getting killed in various gruesome ways. But really, it only amounted to a bunch of screaming in your ear. Whereas in Quake 4, it's a little bit more coherent and thus has a much greater emotional punch. As this is a Raven Software game, there are puzzles to be found, and while they are not of the point-and-click level, they are at least good at getting your brain ticking over from time to time, and don't actually slow down the gameplay all that much. The music is not nearly as good as Quake 1 or 2's, and is just generic all around, and is ultimately forgettable. The voice acting for Quake 4 is pretty bloody good. It's not necessarily on par with Area 51's voice acting, but still good and memorable in its own right. We don't have, sadly, Powers Booth or Fox Mulder or even Marilyn Manson, but instead, we've got a pretty cool voice actor in the guise of Peter Stormare, who is well known for playing quirky and crazy bit characters, most notably Satan in the movie Constantine. In this game, he plays the tech character, Private Johann Strauss. The Strauss character is not as quirky as I would like, and is fairly straight-laced, although he does have some humorous moments, as he's always talking about how he needs more guards because he's very valuable and things of that nature. Overall, the voice acting is, at the very least, on par with a fairly well-produced animated movie. The version of Quake 4 we're looking at today is the Steam re-release, but I've owned it on the Xbox 360 and the PC DVD. By far the best port is the PC DVD, mainly because it comes with supplemental materials and a copy of Quake 2, and it can still be found for cheap at Goodwills and places of that nature. The 360 copy will come with Quake 2 as well, and a few supplemental materials as well. The Steam re-release is, on the other hand, complete crap, and I'm using it because I have no idea where my actual DVD copy is. First and foremost, the Steam version does not come with Quake 2, because that would be saving money. You need to buy it separately. And it also does not work well on modern PCs either. In order to get full graphics, one needs to download a special config file, and as far as I know, you don't need that special config file with the original PC DVD version. As for the 360 version, I cannot recall the port being bad, although it has been many years since I last played it. From what I recall, it worked fairly well, and I was only annoyed at the then modernizations of the gameplay. So in theory at least, the frame rate must not have been that bad, because if it was, I would have remembered it. The PC version of Quake 4 is a true PC game. However, when it comes to changing graphics or even screen resolutions, you have to exit and then start up the game again, which I suppose must have something to do with the id Tech 4 engine, because Doom 3 made you do the same thing. The game thankfully features quick saving and quick loading, and believe me, F5 is your god. And the game ran at a consistent 60 FPS, at least until I reached the Marine Starship. Then the frame rate tanked to 30 FPS for literally no reason. But overall, the various versions of Quake 4 work, and they work fairly well.
Now we're going to take a look at the story, but unlike with other reviews, I'm going to spoil just about everything, so you have been warned.
Quake 4 is a dark shooter in the sense that it pulls no punches when it comes to the story and the events therein. It does not go edgy McEdgenstein, but rather attempts and succeeds in showing a fairly realistic war against xenocidal cyborgs. As Quake 4 is the direct sequel to Quake 2, we must first take a quick look at Quake 2. In the Quake 2 instruction manual, we learn that the horrid Xenos, known as the Strogg, invaded Earth to harvest Earth's biomass to make more cyborgs. In Quake 2 proper, we learn that humanity pushed the Strogg off of Earth and are striking back at the Strogg homeworld, most imaginatively named Strogos. And this is where Quake 2 begins. In that game, you take out the orbital defenses of the Strogg home planet, and then you take out their leader, the Macron. But like with Skynet, there is still much more fighting to be done. Enter Matthew Kane, the player character and all-around badass. He is a new member of Rhino Squad, a squad of badasses in the same vein as the Sulaco Marines. In fact, there are many different named squads in the game, and the whole game itself has a pretty good Aliens vibe to it. Each squad member in this game has their own personality, and while there are no story arcs or anything like that, they at least do more than spout 2 or 3 tired lines over and over again. Well, most of the time at least. The game starts up with you being a part of a second wave of troops that attack the Strogg homeworld. And right from the get-go, you know this game is going to be different, as the game starts up literally with a Marine with half his face shot away panning into view. This really does show the horrors of war, and the rest of the game shows the horrors of war as well. It is not just woohoos and shotguns. When Kane first makes landfall, he gets to doing just one thing, and that's killing Strogg. Eventually, the main plot starts up, and you and the Spec Marine Corps must take out the Nexus by using EMP bombs. This will hopefully make the Strogg shut down, battle droid style. The Spec Marine Corps fights valiantly, but the plan fails, and just about everyone dies, and you, Matthew Kane, has to fight the evil Macron. At first, this fight annoyed me. In Quake 2, the Macron was basically Robo-Thulu, with a railgun for a head. Here, he is a bit less otherworldly and more dramatic, as he laughs a classic 80s evil laugh as he fights you. Later in the game, I realized that this Macron was likely hastily thrown together after the death of the last one, and as such, he likely has some vestige of his former self remaining. This fight is a supposed to lose fight, and Kane gets taken down and drug away for nefarious purposes. You, the player, get turned into a Strog, and it is done in first person as well. It is not cheesy, it is not edgy, it is real. In fact, you can make the case that this is the most anti-war message in the game. You, the player, get put on an assembly line where you lose your legs, you get your gut torn open, and eventually turned into a killing machine. You can do nothing about it, and you can do nothing to stop it or mitigate it. But it gets better than that. You can also say that the game gives you a message of hope, as just before you lose your mind forever, your mates come in and rescue.
Pretty bloody deep stuff for a game about shooting space cyborgs.
So yes, the first half of the game, you're Matthew Kane, Space Marine badass. The second half, you are, well, I think this song will cover what you are.
That's right, Matthew Kane had a SID chip installed.
So with Robo-Kane, no, not Kane with a C like RoboCop 2, but Kane with a K, because the K makes it cooler. With him rescued by Rhino Squad, you must now escape back to human lines. Your mates take your strophication with typical Marine attitude. They make light of it, because it's not like they're going to bawl their eyes out when there are Strog to shoot. The escape lasts a few cool levels, and then you make it back to base. And here we have another excellently written story segment. Your fellow Marines are less understanding than your mates and react with hostility. And can you blame them? You look like an enemy that they have been fighting for who knows how long. Not only that, they have lost numerous friends and colleagues to them as well. So it makes sense for them to be a bit wary. Eventually you have the mission to try and once again take out this Strog Central Core. This mission goes a little better, but the Space Marine Corps still takes heavy casualties. The final boss fight with the Macron is quite fun, but you are then faced with a super final boss fight. It turns out that the Macron was not really the leader, and instead you have to fight the Strog Central Intelligence, aka a giant Cthulhu brain. I rather like the fact that the main Strog Intelligence was a giant eldritch brain rather than just a generic boss, as it gives the Strog some of their mystery back. And when you finally kill the brain, you go back to base for some well-needed R&R, only to learn that you have another mission.
Too bad we will never know what that mission is, because with Quake 4, the Strogverse comes to an end. What could that other mission have been? Well, I actually gave it some thought. Wouldn't it have been really cool if Quake 5 could have been a retelling of Quake 1, where Matthew Kane has to go and fight the Quake 1 universe creatures, the Cthulhu monsters, and perhaps he could have possibly met the awesomeness that is Ranger. But sadly, we'll never get to know, because the next Quake game is not Quake 5, rather it's Quake Champions, and all that is just another bloody multiplayer-only game.
Quake 4 is a classic any which way you look at it, and had a great many forward-thinking elements to it. Its weapons were well thought out and fun to use, and its enemies were par excellence. And you never just shot the same lame troops over and over again. Hell, the game even makes zombies more awesome, as the Z-heads in this game can sometimes be armed with shotties. The story was way more advanced than many FPS stories, both then and now, and really made the player think. So why did it fail? Well, from what I have seen, it once again came down to poor marketing, and the only way I learned of the game was from seeing it randomly in a store. So once again, the greatness of Raven is forgotten due to the ever-present forces of hype.
And so that is Quake 4, one of the many unsung FPSs that I have reviewed on this particular channel, and one that I highly recommend. If you can't find the PC DVD version, then at the very least the Steam version is functional if you get that config file. And if you don't have a PC at all, the Xbox 360 version is at the very least playable and is certainly cheap. This is GeneralLotz, wishing you good Wolfenstein 2, The New Colossus, and good Wolfenstein The New Order, or whatever makes you happy.
If you enjoyed my review of Quake 4, please consider subscribing, and if you can, please consider supporting me on Patreon so that I can continue to bring you these awesome PC game reviews.